Welcome to the Art of Teaching Yoga. My name is Wen-Ling, and I'm a yoga educator and yoga teacher mentor based in Turin, Italy. And today, as part of the Art of Teaching Yoga's expert interview series, I'm thrilled to share with you an expert interview with Dr. Eleanor Criswell Hanna. Let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Criswell Hanna. So Dr. Criswell Hanna is the Professor Emeritus Psychology at the Sonoma State University in California. She also has a long list of achievements, and including being the past president of the Association for Humanistic Psychology. And also she was previously the president of the International Association of Yoga Therapists USA, as well as the founding director of the Humanistic Psychology Institute, now known as Saybrook University, Pasadena. She is the director of the Novato Institute for Somatic Research and Training, and also the editor of Somatics, a magazine and journal of the bodily arts and sciences. Her life's work focuses on somatics, on yoga, embodiment, and ways to awaken the human potential and somatic awareness, theory, practice, and research. I'm so excited to share this interview with you, and I hope you enjoy this. Without further ado, the interview with Dr. Eleanor Criswell Hanna. Good morning, Eleanor. Welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Good morning. I am so happy to be here.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you discovered or got into the field of somatics, a little bit about your background and your years of research in humanistic psychology, as well as how you came across or moved towards somatic yoga?
Mm-hmm. Is that a long story? Because it's been about 50 years. So I am a psychologist, and when I was working on my doctorate, I also began to meditate based on a book that I read. In those days, there weren't meditation teachers around, and there weren't yoga teachers. And so this is sort of a self-discovery situation. So I discovered a book by Ramurti Mishra when I was in the library one day, and I began to read it, and I began to try some things that he was writing about. He was a physician from the Mumbai, formerly Bombay area of India, and also a yogi. And so I began to do the things that he wrote about in his book, Fundamentals of Yoga. I liked the effect. I was telling my students about it because I was teaching a course at the university. And they said, "Oh, please teach us what you're learning." So I began to teach them what I was learning. And so from there, when I went to teach at the Sonoma State University in California, they asked me when I began, if there's a course you could teach that you want to teach, what would it be? And I said, the psychology of yoga. And they said, okay, teach it. So I did. And as I was teaching, I began to bring in some more of the somatics principles because I was also learning and developing those. So just to say that Thomas Hanna and I developed a working relationship when I was at the University of Florida, and he was in the process of preparing to write his first book on somatics, which is called Bodies in Revolt. And so I would bring him things from psychology and from research that would help complement what he was thinking about. And so our dialogue lasted until his death in 1990. And we also studied some with Moshe Feldenkrais, and I began to bring the principles of that into my teaching of yoga at the university. Thomas Hanna studied with Moshe, became a functional integration practitioner, and continued in that. But I continued in teaching yoga. I taught it nearly 40 years at Sonoma State, thousands of students. And as somatics developed, I brought more and more of it into yoga because it was so very, very helpful and so complementary. So what do you think of that,
I'm
Leland?
really curious. As for you, new yoga teachers, they may not be so familiar, for example, with the modalities of somatics. Could you
Uh-huh.
share a little bit more? Because you mentioned that you started to incorporate many of the different elements from somatics and also the principles that from the interactions with Moshe Feldenkrais into your own teaching that lasted almost 40 years. How has
Mhm.
your teaching changed over maybe say the last 40 years?
Well, it has become, and also I was a humanistic psychologist and
Yeah.
very person-centered. So my yoga, as I taught it in the psychology department, became more and more person-centered. So that means that the students were engaged in their own personal practice. It was focused on their lives and how they were developing. And somatics, the word soma is Greek for the living body. Thomas Hanna took that word, made it into a noun. So in English, we talk about somatic this and that, and it doesn't necessarily include the mind. So when you bring in a holistic perspective, then it becomes a mind-body integration. So in yoga, frequently the purpose is to transcend the body. So we're going to get past the body into meditation and into samadhi and into, states of consciousness beyond body. But in somatic yoga, you use the body as a way in, such as tantric yoga fostered the bringing in of hatha yoga, which is more accepting of the body and its processes. And so somatics in general is a term that talks about mind-body integration and all the disciplines that integrate mind and body, because there are many things that we do which don't include the body at all. And many people are prisoners of their bodies because of chronic muscle contractions. Many of them are not in their bodies because they have dissociated due to trauma and so forth. In somatic yoga, you are connecting with yourself and your body as you're doing the yoga, rather than just using the body as a jumping off point for the rest of what you're going to do. So the yoga that I was teaching became more and more personal, was more and more used for personal development of the student and others. And it include more awareness of what's going on with your body than you would have in a typical yoga class, and more listening to your body, and more awareness of every aspect of what you're doing. So you're not just going into a posture, but you're aware of every aspect of it as you're going into the posture. And after you come out of the posture, you take some time to feel the sensations you've created in doing the posture. So it's makes use of the experience more fully than we're just going to do a series of postures. So it became more awareness involved over the years.
See, I see. That's really quite different from a normal, like for example, hatha yoga approach, in which, for example, very often you might hear the instructor say the body. Right? As I was undergoing the training with you and with
Mhm.
Lyman and with the rest, I found it very, very interesting that there was a lot of emphasis, and you mentioned this many times, that in somatic yoga, you use your body, use personal pronouns. You speak to us a little bit about that? Why is it so important?
So that you will integrate mind and body. And so you will use the teachings for your body and your life. And rather than Your body is just a vehicle because it has tremendous wisdom. It is millions of years old in terms of genetics that has been passed on from generation to generation. It has tremendous wisdom, and it can give you tremendous joy if you really can tune in on its responses. And so we, in somatic yoga, we do use the personal pronouns. So the teacher is not going to say, move the leg over, or, and not, especially not going to say, stretch your back. Now, stretch your back, because in stretching your back, you trigger the stretch reflex, the muscles recontract again. But if you were to put your attention on the flexors that you are using in the posture, your brain will lengthen the back muscles without you stretching them, because that's how we move. So this focus on you and your body is not, reason we mention it over and over again is that it's not easy to do, because we've all been trained in yoga to say the body. You know,
Yeah, definitely. And exactly.
yeah.
And I find that very often using the body, I remember during the training, one of the other participants mentioned that sometimes when you use the word the body, it's almost as if the body is floating and separate from your being, from who you are as a person. And it almost creates this disembodied experience that is very actually at odds with the goal and the purpose of what yoga is, and the direction actually yoga would like to as a discipline it is. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about biofeedback, because you mentioned something about the body's ability to heal, the body's ability to use the information to find, for us to derive great joy and also great healing within the body. Could you speak to our viewers a little bit more about biofeedback training and how we can, for example, using somatic movement or various principles from somatics to self-regulate and to begin the process of self-healing?
Wonderful question. So biofeedback originally was the use of electronic devices to measure physiological function and give you feedback about it. So you can measure your hand temperature, for example, and the equipment will let you know when the temperature is going up and when the temperature is going down. So with that kind of feedback, you can do a more, let's say, precise way of changing your hand temperature. So you can really change what's happening physiologically. So to change your hand temperature, one of the things you have to do is decrease sympathetic nervous system activity, which causes the blood vessels to constrict and causes your hands to cool. So as you decrease the activity of your sympathetic nervous system, your hands will warm. And you can do that more easily with getting feedback. So you can see your hands warming and you know what I did actually works. It actually works when I relax my body. That's one example. Or muscle, recording your muscle activity. Sensors put on top of the muscle, letting you know the microvolt level that goes with the contraction, so you can see yourself actually relaxing the muscle. You can feel it. So with that data, you can do an even better job of relaxing your muscles. Because sometimes we sit there, for example, we sit there in meditation and our minds wander. But with brainwave feedback, you can see instantly, you can hear instantly, because some of this equipment has visual feedback, some of it has auditory feedback. So you can see or hear instantly when your mind has wandered. So you're not taking more time to suddenly notice your mind has wandered. You know immediately your mind has wandered. and you can clear your mind, and you can see immediately that your mind is clear, that you've gone back to the brain waves that are called alpha. They are 8 to 12 cycles per second, and you can see and hear immediately that you are back into alpha again, which is the resting brainwave state, but it's also the meditation brainwave frequency for many people. So as you do the somatic exercises, you voluntarily contract certain muscles, and then you voluntarily decontract them. You can feel the difference in the muscle, both internally, and you can feel it with your hands. So in somatic yoga, we are paying attention to, did we get the results that we wanted? Did you really relax your body? Or are you thinking you relaxed your body? And we can think we relaxed our body, and we're actually still sitting there pretty contracted. So anyway, we can get better at being our own feedback device. And in that way, you can feel, for example, if you're trying to sleep, if everything is tight and contracted, it will keep you awake. But if you use these techniques to relax your body, you'll be ready to go to sleep. So with feedback training, either with or without equipment, you will know right away whether you've relaxed your body or not, because you can feel the differences.
Right, I find it really interesting that in this somatic yoga approach, a lot of the emphasis is placed on the contraction of the muscle, and also, even more importantly, on the slow and the conscious release, because that is actually when, if I understood correctly, the magic happens, right? When the feedback starts to, the loop starts to form, and then you start to really deeply connect. Is that right?
Right, that's right. So
Yeah.
animals do that. They do something called pandiculation. They will arch their backs, or they will extend a leg, or they'll do various things. And they are preparing themselves to be able to move, because maybe they've been asleep, they've been eating, maybe they're just getting contracted, and so they will change their body state. This is kind of like a version of that. That's why when you do the postures, in somatic yoga, the slow coming out of the posture is maybe the most important part, because that's when your brain is resetting your muscles. So just to go back a bit, when you contract into a posture, you contract certain muscles to get into that position, you are then holding that position. Parts of your brain are stimulated over and over and over again. The neurons that are involved in those contracted muscles and their neighbors are all holding it. That puts a focus on that activity. It quiets down the rest of the brain so that the postures become more meditations, each one of them, than just going into a posture. So the contraction uses your motor cortex, and then the slow relaxing, which is called an eccentric contraction, is also using other neurons in the motor cortex. So you've taken the control away from a deep part of the brain called the brainstem. You're using the motor cortex, and then you're still using that as you decrease the output to the muscles. And then that's your new baseline. See, if you stretch your muscles, that triggers the stretch reflex, they recontract, and you're back to the same place you were in due time. May not be immediately, but it's going to be a little bit later. They will recontract. So we're in this, we're changing levels of brain control to reset the muscles, and then we give them back to all the automatic parts of the motor system. So we're not going to be controlling everything all the time from your motor cortex. but we're resetting the muscles and then letting the whole system work.
I see. And through this process of resetting the motor system, what happens is the muscles begin to return to its original length safely and smoothly. Is that right? And that is what the action or the process by which it actually releases the hypercontractions or the chronically held tension inside the body for example, for many people in the shoulders or in the back.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Right. That's right.
Yeah. I see. And for example, if yoga teachers wanted to start to incorporate some elements or even just principles of somatic yoga, how can they begin to, for example, create an environment that their students or clients would have a more embodied experience while practicing yoga with them? You know, like for new yoga teachers, how can they begin to approach this?
Well, I would suggest they get the book Somatics by Thomas Hanna would be a good starting point. They can also use my book, How Yoga Works, but they can also get a copy of the Cat Stretch series. They can learn from you. You can share with them some of the principles and other people that you may train. And they can just begin. When you're bringing this into a class for the first time, you really need to help them understand why this is valuable. Many people go into yoga and they can't do the yoga because their bodies are too stiff. And you can say, well, just keep doing it. It'll take a long time to be able to do it. But if you will prepare your body with the somatic exercises, and they don't take any time to do. So you can do a few of them before you begin the yoga class and, do one or more later in case you run into something. But it's pretty easy to bring it in by bringing it in to begin the class. We do warm-ups before we do a yoga class. Bringing in some of the somatic exercises in your warm-up will help make the class people. Go ahead.
Yeah, personally, I've found that the somatic yoga exercises, even before I did the training with you, I found that incorporating a few of them just to really get the students into the sense of hearing and listening into their bodies. Yes. And like focusing on where the contractions are. Because another thing I wanted to ask you about was about interoception, because a lot of what you talked about is really beginning to listen to the body. And so much of modern yoga, or even anything relating to physical activity, is very disembodied because it's from outside in. The instructors tell you what to look like, where to place your arms, and then the arm goes here, the knee goes there, and you don't know what you're supposed to feel like in the pose. On the other end, I see it and I feel that somatic yoga is a very different experience and a very different approach. Could you speak a little bit on that?
Well, you're sort of pointing to the difference between first person and third person. So third person is your perception of other people and their perception of you. First person is your perception of yourself. And so if yoga is frequently taught by the instructor doing the pose, someone doing the pose, and then you imitate what they're doing. You put your body in that same position. In somatic yoga, you are guided to do it. And so the instructor is not modeling it for you, but letting you discover it within your own self. So you are guided. And then from there on, then you can visualize kinesthetically what you're going to be doing to set your brain up so that it can do it easily. So treating yourself like somebody else, if I do it in a third person way, I am going to make my body do the posture. I am going to make it go into the plow. I'm intending to go into the plow, I make it go into the plow. If it can. But
Mm.
what we want is full cooperation within your body. So all the muscle groups, nobody in your body, no aspect of it is startled by what you're going to do and trying to stop it, trying to brace, trying to interfere because it thinks you're going to hurt yourself. So it's more getting full cooperation from all of your motor system and treating it like it is your body. Anything more you want to say about that, Winland?
I'm just really curious as well because you mentioned about this engaging the full body system, right? So that you don't want to startle any parts of this whole movement. Because it's the entire body is a chain and a system, and we're not really just isolating any single part of the body. And I remember from the course, what was really interesting to me was also that we would take time to prepare a mental plan and visualize in our minds the movement that we actually take. And this is called means whereby before actually doing that actual movement. Could you speak a little bit about that as well?
So when we visualize, especially a sort of kinesthetic, if you visualize, period, you'll use the back of the brain, the occipital lobe. If you visualize and feel what it would be like to go into that posture, you use a part of the brain called the supplementary motor cortex that's in front of the voluntary motor cortex, and it connects up with the motor system. So it sort of primes things. And also one of the things we do is during the visualization is let your brain develop a motor plan for what you're going to do. It's going to plan it. And then you're going to bring in what you need from your different motor programs in order to do it. So if you take just a few seconds to develop a motor plan, your body, all your body systems know what we're going to do. And they're all ready to cooperate rather than part of you saying, no, I don't want to do that. Bracing and no, as far as we can go, no.
I see. So it's really, I find it very, very, very holistic and quite a different approach as compared to how much of movement is taught nowadays. I wanted to ask you one final question before we end today's interview. In your opinion, what makes a great yoga teacher? And if there's one piece of advice you could give new yoga teachers or teachers in training, what would that be?
Okay, I can't give one piece of advice, but I'm going to give about three. And one of those is the relationship is very important. The relationship between you and your students. And it doesn't even have to be acted out in any way. It just is your caring about them and their feeling of your caring about them. So the relationship is very, very important. The second thing is to keep up your yoga practice. You need to be a developing, alive, fully functioning yogi. We used to say yogini, but nowadays everybody's a yogi. And so your yoga has to be very alive for you. And the other thing is safety is incredibly important. Guiding your students in a way that everyone is safe and they are not hurting themselves in some way trying to do the yoga. That's
Eleanor, could you speak a little bit more just on the portion on, you mentioned that it's very important for student yoga teachers to keep their yoga alive. And I know many teachers, for example, in the first years of their teaching, they take on so many classes that they have hardly any time for their own practice, or they start to lose inspiration, they lose drive. They're like, I don't even know why I'm teaching anymore. They start to feel disillusioned. Right? How do you have any words of advice or any guidance on how they can come back and feel that inspiration again, feel that kind of joy?
yes. So I think saving some time for yourself, that's why it's very personal. It's very personal. Your personal practice is very important in terms of your communicating to your students. So your personal practice is really important to keep in touch with the joy, the inspiration. The inspiration comes in your meditation, in your practice, in your time off. Also reading books, studying, keeping your learning going, and getting a sense of the experiences your students are having, the progress they're making, how their lives are transforming. That's very inspiring. You know, like, why am I doing this? Well, you're doing this because people are growing, developing, healing, and it's a wonderful thing to know about that. So you do need to have a chance to know about their experiences. They really need to know about people's experiences.
Yeah, that's really, really important. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us, Eleanor. It's been such a great pleasure. Thank you so much for your wealth of knowledge. And I'll be sharing with the rest of the group more information on your upcoming trainings, about your book, about your website as well. Is there anything else you would like to add?
I just want to say I appreciate so much your sense of somatic yoga and how much you have understood it and experienced it and get it. I just so appreciate that, and I really appreciate having the opportunity to do this interview with you.
Thank you to you, no, Eleanor. It's you. It's a huge pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.